Thank you, everybody, for coming to our session. This is such a ginormous room. If people feel comfortable, there's a lot of seats down in front. Don't come all at once.
And if not, we'll make an effort to make eye contact with everybody and walk around a little bit.
Hello, everybody. My name's Darren Paskey. I'm a supportive employment program manager with HCA. And part of our role is working with the Medicaid Transformation Project, which allows us to do support for supportive employment and supportive housing across Washington State. One of our coworkers, Dawn Miller, unfortunately isn't feeling well today, so she's not able to join us. But I just want to emphasize that myself and Anessa and our other coworker, Jackie and Don, are available for consultations and trainings because we really believe that to get the services out to the community, you're going to need some support. Or if you have questions, feel free to reach out. So we're really glad to be here as part of this conference today, and I'll hand it over to Anessa.
Yes, hello, my name is Anessa Williams. I'm the FCS Supportive Housing Program Manager, serving mostly Eastern Washington. So if you are a provider east of the Cascades, I'm your contact for all things supportive housing, training, technical assistance, random questions. I am here to help. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how well supportive housing and supported employment go together as services.
We're definitely strong believers that together we can really change our communities by helping people get stable housing and having jobs to pay for transitional housing or even move into permanent housing. So here's a couple of bulletins that we're going to be talking about today. Is that supportive employment is based on an evidence-based program as well as housing. It's called Individual Placement and Support for Employment. It's been around for a long time, but it really gives that structure and roadmap to provide supportive employment services out in the community. We're going to talk a little bit about relationship development because it really takes people coming together to really help participants in the program. As well as on employment side, we really focus on some of those soft skills, transitional skills to be successful out in employment, and really look at how we can combine services. And sometimes that's other providers coming together so that we can work together to really help our end participants. Anything to add, Anessa?
I would just like to put a quick housekeeping item out there. I know that folks are able to ask us questions through the WOVA app, but since we're a small group, also feel free to just raise your hand, pop in with questions anytime. We're definitely happy to make this more discussion-based if that's what folks would like.
Yeah, would you rather have more discussion and not get through the slide deck? That's more important to get those questions answered today. So this is the first thing. I'm just curious of the audience today. What do people think work is? What does work mean to you? Today it means I get to be in front of this audience and I get a microphone and I get to run around a little bit. That's why I'm not on stage. I don't want to hurt myself today. Yes? Employment pays. That works for me. That's my goal. Thank you.
Heard purpose over here.
What do you have? It does. Thank you, coworker Kimberly. We're here to have fun. I think, Did you have something else to add, or anybody else?
Structure.
Yes, structure.
That's a great answer.
Dignity. And what were you going to add? Hopefully stability, right? Or not, maybe the opportunity to get something better so you can get stability. Yes. I know in my community, my neighbors all work, I work, all my coworkers work. There's that expanded community. Well, I just wanted to kind of think outside the box a little bit and see what those little elements and those different chords. Sometimes I think recovery and employment, it's like a tree because we have all these roots and we need to tap into these different segments to really make the tree strong and create opportunities for the people that we work with. Oh. Do you want to jump in and share a story?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
We would like to just put this into context a little bit, and I would love to share a story from our colleague Dawn, who isn't here today. She has a great success story about a client that she worked with. who, when she asked him what kind of job he wanted to have, he said he wanted to be Batman. And if you are new to this kind of work, you might be wondering, what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to help somebody find a job if the job they want is to be Batman? But a seasoned supported employment specialist would know to ask questions like, what do you like about Batman? What intrigues you about that? Is it the cool outfit? Is it being up at night? Is it helping people? Is it justice involvement? It turns out this guy really liked cool, fancy cars, and he wanted to work with cool cars. That's awesome. That opens up so many avenues of possibilities. We could look at detailing. We could look at auto mechanic. We could look at being a valet. All kinds of jobs where you get to work with cool cars and you get to feel a little bit like Batman. And it's really important in our kind of work that when somebody shares a really wild sounding dream to us, we don't shoot that down. We ask, okay, how can we get there just a little bit at a time? Or what can we do to make you feel like you're getting in the right direction there?
A lot of us services really focus on that person-centered piece, and we might take our judgments and get behind in the backseat to really, as some people have said, let the individual do the driving and how we're going to support the person with those goals. Thank you for sharing that, Inessa. So a lot of what I do and what we do, I'm sure in this room, are all sensitive to the different social determinants of health or the health needs of the individual. And it's just not one thing. There's a lot of different chords that come to play in this. And I'm really passionate about employment because I think it fits into so many things. I can work with people out of the justice system and they're coming out back into the community and to help them get a job or into education. Or people need better health care or more specialists. Well, they can go to work and get health insurance and leave Medicaid behind and take on that insurance that a provider has, or maybe even get educational benefits from an employer, or work with different partners. Partner I work with a lot in employment is DSHS, a division of Oak Rehab, to really work with the person and get that posse around them to create different opportunities and the support through the different stages to do that. I'm a firm believer that if I can get somebody off benefits, and we're talking about maybe Medicaid and maybe Social Security, or maybe it's a blend that they keep them, but they're really being more independent in the community and I think a more valued member of the community because they're able to change, break down those stereotypes. You know, break through those social justice barriers so they could be more independent. And one stat I don't have, but definitely employment is a critical mental health intervention. I think at lunch we heard about the gentleman's brother who died at a very early age. And I think being inflicted with a chronic disease really kind of impacts communities. It impacts families, can impact all of us. And I think some of the services that we do through foundational community supports can really provide a greater support network for folks in our communities. So this is kind of a challenge, and maybe it's a takeaway thought. People on benefits, like SSI, supplemental security income, you might get $943. And maybe that goes up every year. Can you imagine living in Seattle? I can't speak for Spokane, so
We're getting up there too.
I'm sure cost of living is high, but how would you manage? Maybe you get a break with subsidized housing. Subsidized housing, you know, is a premium right now to get those services. So you might have $600 a month, you know, if you didn't have a car. Maybe you can pay for your bus pass and get that reloaded, or maybe you use a service for that. But we're kind of tied in to the services, and it's very narrow. You're just, sustaining yourself in poverty. And that's unfortunately, I'm a believer that people should become employed and move off benefits and be more independent. But a lot of the participants I've worked with over my 30 plus years in social services, this is what they focus on. Darren, don't mess with my benefits. Or a family member might be reliant on those benefits. So there might be a lot of different visions and different people and different perspectives that we have to realize that we need to do some education to kind of keep that hope and drive alive for some of the folks. So do people out here, are you working with people on SSI who are stuck in this? Yeah. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. Yep. And, maybe some people are on Social Security disability where you might have a little bit more. Maybe they might have the same kind of benefits. So it's really limiting it there. So this is an overview of both practices for evidence-based. I'll jump into IPS, is that we really focus on preferences, as we talked about, people being in the driver's seat. How do we honor that person's choice? Integration with the team. It might be a team in your organization. It might be a team in your community. Maybe you have to work with crisis folks. Maybe you have to work with a therapist. Whatever those folks work with to have that level of integration. And then with evidence-based practices, we talk about job development, a systematic approach. We have employment specialists, but we have goals for how many employers they're going to go see a week, how much time they're going to be in the community. Having a goal, writing that with the participant and reviewing it periodically. That we have long-term supports, that when somebody gets a job, we're not going to abandon them. We're going to provide that ongoing support. FCS gives us those extra months to do that. So it's really nice to have that extra benefits. We educate people about what happens when you go to work on benefits. What are the work incentives? What are some of the pitfalls? How do we support and help them, encourage them to report to Social Security that they started work? That we really focus on competitive employment. Some people have some different skills or different goals, but really focusing on jobs out in the community that anybody can apply for. And as well as we talked a little bit about having that stigma or having that bias, that I'm listening to the person and I'm not limiting some of their jobs, like Batman, get a cool car, that we're open to that discussion. And that we're intentional. If somebody comes into my program and says they want to do employment, let's get out there and do that. I've seen programs that wait 270 days before they go out and do some of that. So it's just really that change of thought to be intentional that we're going to provide the services that we're talking about. I'll hand it over to you, Vanessa.
Yes, there's a lot of similarities between PSH and IPS as far as the evidence-based principles that we go off of. For PSH, we see choice in housing. Of course, we ideally want people to be educated on all different kinds of housing that they could be eligible for and have at least a few choices to choose from, because we know that if somebody is involved in that process and has a say in what kind of housing they have, they're going to be a lot more invested in keeping it and they're going to be a lot happier. The next one is safe and affordable housing. So ideally, we want folks to be paying no more than 30% of rent and living in units that are habitable according to HHS and HQS inspections. We also don't want to see folks gentrified and in concentrated areas of poverty. We want folks to be able to have the potential to live in any kind of neighborhood or community that they might be interested in. We want housing that's integrated into the community, so we like to see that people are in regular units where you could drive by and have no idea that the person who lives there is involved in services of any kind, to reduce that stigma and help people become involved in the community and be able to wrap back into the community as a whole. Separation of housing and services is also really important. We want to see that the person who's providing a housing specialist or case management services is a completely different person than the one who is taking your rent every month or doing housing inspections, things like that. We don't want people's housing to be put at risk based on what kind of barriers they're having and the supports that they're seeking for those. Flexible and voluntary services, we want people to be able to have all kinds of different options to choose from, be able to change their mind about what services they're participating in, whether that's housing, employment, peer services, SUD services. People should be able to choose from a whole menu of options and change their mind at any time about what they do or do not want to participate in. And if they don't want to participate in any services, that's fine too. They should still be allowed to be housed. Access to housing, so a housing first approach, meaning somebody can come in and say, I want to look for housing. That means we're going to look for housing, no matter if you have evictions on your history or if you have no income or if you're actively using. All of those things are barriers, and you can talk to folks about that, and they should still be able to access the services and find some housing that's appropriate and suitable for them.
There it is.
And the last one is full rights of tenancy. We like to see that people have a legal lease, the same as any one of us would have, with their name on it, with no unusual provisions about drug testing, mandated services, things like that.
Any thoughts about any of those principles? Yeah. Let me come down. This will be better. Thank you.
For a lot of the people I work with, their housing is based off their income, and if their income goes too high, right, then they have at the risk of losing their housing. So a lot of the people I'm working with are on SSIs, fixed incomes, and a lot of them don't want to go to work. But I know also at the same time, we can exclude certain sorts of income and they can maintain their housing. So is that something that's even being taken into consideration when we're separating those services? Or
Let's have more of a conversation offline about that. I'll give you my
Okay.
contact information. We can set up a time to talk.
It's a great question because that really limits what people want to do by some of those barriers. Thank you for asking that. This is a little bit more about IPS. Very intentional services. You know, I've worked in services where I've had a caseload above 20. It was like 70. Like when you're doing some of that, you really can't provide services that are going to specialize on employment. So these are the suggested caseloads, and that really work closely with Division of Vocational Rehab. They can be a really important partner in changing somebody's career projective or educational goals. We also focus that employment specialist does employment. They might have a little bit of support or work with a team member around housing case management. 95% of their time, we really want to see that focus on that employment service parts. And that we really want somebody to build that relationship with employment specialists. So we don't want somebody to come in and do an intake, somebody come in and do job development, or somebody does job coaching, that the employment specialist would do all those type of services, because you're building that relationship and you're building trust. And from what I've seen in the progress, you're really building that closer relationship, and you can see a lot more growth with the individual. We really talk about disclosure, because when I worked with folks, I was doing job development, they're really concerned, like, Darren, what are you going to go out there and talk to employers about? It's just like, I'm going to talk about your strengths. I'm going to talk about what you like to do, those type of things. I'm not talking about diagnostics, criminal history, medications, nothing like that. And sometimes I would go out and do some modeling with folks just to reinsure what I'm doing when I'm going out to employers, because people are really afraid. Stigma is huge in the mental health community, and I think SUD as well, is that we want to be upfront about some of the information we're doing and have that person buy in. Because I've had people say, no, Darren, I don't want you talking to anybody. That's fine. I can do the support, until maybe they hit some barriers and might need a little bit more support to get the job that they want. This is a really high number, 65%. I go out and do a lot of fidelity reviews. I have not seen that number. And for me, that's okay, because we all need to start somewhere and getting out in the community and building those skills and abilities where people are confident in going out and meeting with employers and providing that support. So I really like to see that as a curve to achieve out there. There are a few agencies doing that, and it's a nice surprise when it does happen. We also talk about a sort of engagement, and that we're doing follow-up, because in behavioral health, I've seen a lot of people, like, they ghost you. Maybe they get a job and they ghost you. What are some of those strategies that we can still connect with somebody to show them, I'm still concerned, we still care about your health and wellness, and we really want to see you be successful. Over to you, Anessa.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I have a background in direct service supportive housing. I worked with lots of folks that got housed and were stably housed. And after they felt good in their housing, they kind of hit a point where they're like, I don't know exactly what to do with my time. Or I saw people just kind of feeling depressed, feeling like they don't have a lot of direction. They have other things to work on and don't know how they want to get there. And I can tell you, I never got very far by asking somebody, would you like a job? Lots of folks that I worked with maybe had never worked in their life, hadn't worked in 20 years, had lots of other barriers, and asking that question is pretty intimidating, right? If that's not something you were planning on, do you want a job? They're gonna say no. I just got my housing, I've got my subsidies, I don't wanna mess with my income so I don't lose my benefits. What are different ways that we can open up that conversation? First of all, it's really important to follow up with folks long-term after they're housed. Getting them housing is really only the small piece of the puzzle. There's going to be lots of barriers that folks continue to have after they're housed. Seeing coordination of care continued is really important, making sure that everybody that's a part of this person's team stays wrapped into the whole process and knows what's going on, of course with appropriate conversations about disclosure and things like that. Employment or vocational support, which I'll talk a little bit more about on the next slide. Informal community support development, so helping people access other resources in the community, find hobbies, build natural supports, meet people in their neighborhood. Develop independent living skills, worked with lots of folks that if you haven't lived out indoors in 20 years, you might not know how to do your laundry. You might not know that you need a shower curtain up to prevent flooding. You might not know how to store food after you've opened it. It's really important to be able to check in with people and make sure they have all the skills they need to be successful and make their house a home. Increasing ADLs, helping folks get access to caregiving services. Helping folks with benefits management and retention, and always landlord liaising too. There's always lots and lots of neighbor conflicts and landlord conflicts and confusion about the lease and all of that kind of stuff that it can really help to have a housing specialist there mediating those conversations and coaching the person through how do we have a conversation like this. So engaging housed participants is a big barrier for a lot of housing specialists. A lot of folks think once they get housed, what are you going to help me with? I've got my apartment already. I'm good to go. I don't need anything else from you. It's really important to set the precedent about, I'm going to continue to follow up with you if that's what you'd like, and let's talk about what else we might be able to work on. Treatment plans should include goals to things that relate to people's quality of life, not just being housed or not being housed. There should be things on there about what are you interested in? Do you want to connect with your family? Do you want to save money? Do you want to explore a hobby once you're housed? How do you want to decorate your place? All kinds of things like that are conversations you can have with people. Proactively reaching out to landlords and other members of a person's care team. So, don't wait for a landlord to call you and say, your person threw a giant party this weekend and I'm going to post a 10-day on their door. Make a point to have conversations with them about how are things going. I'm checking in regularly to help mitigate any of those problems before they come up. Soliciting feedback from participants and from landlords and property management that you work with can be really helpful. And we can talk more about what that looks like, but I'm talking about surveys, focus groups, all kinds of stuff like that. Providing support with inspections, renovations, lease renewals. Lots of folks might not know that their subsidy, you have to do yearly paperwork, a yearly income renewal, things like that. And I've seen people almost lose their housing because they didn't know the paperwork was coming, or it got lost, or they didn't have the right support in filling it out. So just for that reason alone, it's really important to continue to follow up with folks. Helping with transportation, if your agency allows you to do that, can be a huge help in getting folks to access other resources. Meeting people at their home too. I cannot advocate enough for how important it is to meet people in their space where they're at, if they're comfortable with that. Somebody's living space is going to be such a huge indicator of their mental health and their quality of life and what supports you might be able to continue to provide to them. And bringing food can also be a great way to engage with people that maybe aren't engaging with you. Hitting the food bank, getting some pastries, knocking on somebody's door saying, hey, I remember you said you really like muffins. Brought you some muffins, can we chat for a minute? Could be a great way to open the door. So as far as opening the door to further conversations with people that are already housed, and how do we get to that next step about things to work on, besides just asking, do you want a job, or do you want to go to school, or things like that that might be a little bit too intimidating up front. You can ask, what kind of food would you like to be cooking or eating? I've worked with folks before that had absolutely no skills about how to prepare a meal, right? Folks that were very used to just eating like chips and soda and canned food. I've worked with folks that are like, I would love to be able to figure out how to make pasta. Cool, let's look at some recipes. Let me teach you how to do this. How do you want to decorate your place, right? What would make you feel like this place is comfortable and it's yours and you can look around and feel like you're at home here? How are you getting around? Are they close to a bus line? Do they need a bike? Do they need to set up STA ride services? These were great ones for specifically getting at employment. Do you ever get bored or lonely? What do you do for fun? What are you interested in? What do you have planned next? All of those things can kind of help people get into a mindset of, I could be doing more, I could be working towards other things, and let me start to think about what those are. Because of course, oftentimes when somebody's just getting housed, they're still in that survival mode, they're not comfortable yet. It might take a while and a few conversations to get somebody to be thinking about, oh, maybe I could go back to school, or maybe I am interested in working. And it's just about the way that you approach those conversations.
So I really believe employment is part of that recovery process, that following the IPS guidelines is individualized, really focus on strength-based. There's been a lot of research behind it that really shows a lot of data and stats that really show if you use this model, you'll see significant gains in employment. Even during the COVID pandemic, IPS was still reporting over 40% employment for individuals with behavioral health issues, which is pretty staggering in terms of such a trying times. And really focus on different types of relationships with the individual and the organizations. IPS does not look at readiness. We're going on the person and honoring their choices about employment or school. It's going to have different effects. It's nonlinear. I've worked with people, even my own kids, you see them do something, they do a few steps back, and we look at those different support networks that we can do that to help them with their employment or school choices. And really, it's an employment specialist, and I believe the housing folks too, in supportive housing. We're all advocates in the community looking at change and building better communities. So one thing that IPS really focuses on, how we build relationships. In my former agency that I worked with in behavioral health, there was a lot of silos. And my program and my team really weren't considered, a specialist. I did, we're employment specialists, but we weren't the therapists, we weren't the nursing staff. We were looked at a little bit differently. It took a lot of internal advocacy that my team needs to be at the table when we're all talking about cases and doing consultation. We need the same time. We need more than 5 minutes going through a list of folks who are in the program, but we need to hear what's going on and what other support strategies are going on in place, or maybe some different types of structure, maybe some different connections in the community might provide more stability with folks. So really looking at those type of connections and partnerships that we have, and making sure that we're providing a valid service for the person. Are they getting their needs met? Can we move forward in different ways? A couple of more different values. I don't think I'll be able to go through all these, but you can really see, I think that the focus on recovery can be a very broad bandwidth of the different types of services. But most importantly is that we're meeting the person's need. I had somebody get a job at Costco, and he used to do athletics when he was at Washington State University. So they came up to him and asked me, because I was doing some job coaching, do you think he could be part of our softball team? I said, I don't know, let's find out. We could ask him. But that's kind of what can happen, some of the magic of that community integration and building those support structures like that, where people can be more inclusive in their community. Thank you. So this is a little bit about disclosure and also release of information, because I know I've worked with people who are really concerned about how we talk to employers or information that may be shared. It's really that minimum piece of information that maybe we have to share, or maybe how we're educating about some of the things that we really want that individual to be comfortable to disclose, and practicing how they might approach that with employers. And letting them know that we're really focusing on the person as an individual, skills and abilities, not label as their diagnosis or by their criminal history or whatever that else might look like. And it's that ongoing relationship that we're building with folks to help them with that.
And it's exactly the same for building relationships with landlords and property managers as well, as far as disclosure and what might be more helpful to say than something else.
Absolutely, and this is just some of the statistics. This is why IPS says we need to be out in the community doing employment development, because there might be different job markets that we're not able to get to, or there might be some other job development activities. Once we build that relationship with employer, we might learn about more of their needs, maybe do some job carving or some customized employment to really help the person find the job that they're looking for and be successful. Over to you for some housing.
Yeah, some statistics on housing searches. Just some interesting facts to keep in your pocket is that rents tend to be lower and units are more available in October through April and especially December and January because a lot of people don't want to move in the winter, I'm assuming is why that is. Personal experience for me, I could tell you it makes a lot of difference to directly reach out to landlords, whether that's in person or contacting them directly. And explaining your situation, whether that be with the participant, writing a letter, just explaining up front before you put in an application, like, hey, my credit's really low, but I can have a cosigner, or I'm using a voucher, or any of those kinds of things that you might be worried about a landlord discriminating against you for. Having a conversation can make a huge difference. And while you will encounter landlords and property managers that say, I don't work with people that have vouchers and things like that, you'll also find ones that are thrilled to work with somebody with a voucher because that means at least 70% of the rent is going to be there every single month. And if you can spin it that way as a housing specialist, that can really help a lot too. 97% of renters and home buyers use the internet in their home search, but do not only use the internet, right? It's a great tool to have rent.com, apartments.com, stuff like that when you're looking for housing for somebody. And driving around and looking for those for rent signs in the yard and calling property management companies. They might have units they haven't posted yet, or it might be a really small landlord that doesn't use websites or even things like Craigslist. There's lots of creative ways to look for housing that I think we forget about sometimes, and it can be really helpful when finding somebody housing. And also 58.5% of renters who moved between 2019 and 2021 found a new place to live in less than a month. Now, of course, if you're working with somebody that has some big housing barriers, it might take longer than that. And only half of people found one in less than a month. Give yourself some grace when you're helping somebody find housing. It might take much longer than that. It might take a few months, especially depending on the community that you're in and the barriers that you have to work with.
So this goes into a little bit about soft skills. Definitely working with folks. Maybe they've had some trauma, maybe they're coming out of a state hospital, or maybe they haven't had that opportunity to where somebody really invested in them to get to these things. And it might take a lot of practice. I had one employment specialist. She was really good about doing informational interviews and bringing in her participants so that they could practice those interviewing skills. So there might be some real creative ways to really encourage people to be part of groups or part of the informational interviewing practice to really develop some of those things so they can feel more confident. And it's also a great way to kind of validate some of those skills and abilities that they might have on the resume and how they are transferable skills to a position that you're looking for. Plus, I think they can transfer to other skills and really validate that process that people have those skills and abilities to do something different or change jobs or even go back to school for training if they decide to do that. Just some of the examples, about some of the skills. I know teamwork and accountability are really important things, and sometimes folks I've worked with, they really say, like, well, Darren, these are kind of outside, my customer service job at Safeway. But some of these things can be implemented and just reflected back to folks. Sometimes it's really cool to do a resume with folks for the first time and they really don't understand some of the skills and abilities they have. That has to be kind of reflected back to them in some of the cases. Sometimes this can be really fun working with some of the folks to really highlight the skills that they have. So this one's a little bit on collaboration. I don't know if this was mine or yours.
Yeah, this one's yours.
Okay, I'll just keep going. So nobody just has the whole big picture. I'm part of a large team that's pretty dynamic, and I'm always learning things from my housing partners. And the same is working with folks that when I'm working on employment, I don't have the big picture. Sometimes I have to go and consult with the medical provider on symptom management or give them that feedback loop, because maybe myself or my staff might be seeing somebody a couple times a week, and the provider might see them every 3 months, and there's different things going on. Or maybe I have to do some education with family members why employment is a good idea, why we should support this, or maybe even around school for some of the things. So it's always good to do consultations with the different teams. When I was managing a program, I had to advocate a lot to get my team members to go to the behavioral health team, the therapist team, child and family team, and the SUD team, just so we're always continually sharing that story of why employment is important and the power of work for that. But it's also a great way to build up those relationships, because then I would see more referrals come into my program to help people to continue the cycle, to work with that. And then we were able to share success stories. And sometimes it's also with the candidates I work with, the participants. They said, "What, Darren got a job doing what?" Maybe he could do that. You know, maybe I could do that if he was able to do that, because that peer network can be pretty powerful. I worked with one lady who was always in crisis from my perspective. It probably wasn't true, but I would see her a lot in the ER, and she would have her bags packed, and she was ready for another 7-day stay at the hospital. And I would say, "We've been doing this a lot. Have you ever thought about coming to my employment program? Have you ever thought about maybe sharing some of your life experience with others so they could decrease the use of the crisis services?" Just to have that conversation. And she was able to come through our program and decided, "I want to be a certified peer specialist. How do I do that, Darren?" And we worked with her. We did a survival job in food service so she could do that. But then because of that messaging and because of that interaction, we were able to change that framework a little bit to really validate some of the skills and abilities she had, and that ability to interact with folks who are going some of the same trauma that she was going through. So definitely, you know, I think advocacy and collaboration can really create opportunities for folks. It's a little bit more just about communicating with teams and how important that is, because I've seen programs in silos, and unless you're sharing that, that's why I'm not on the stage, I don't want to fall down, but unless you kind of tell those success stories and share some of those experiences, people don't get it. I was just in a training and it talked about data, and it's just like, I like data because I always had this story that I would share about number of interviews, number of job placements, job retention, things like that. But I also had to make it real. You know, I had to put a personal story in there just to kind of reflect where the person came from, what they're doing, and the success that they're having now. So definitely, you know, recovery language and strength-based, and celebrate success. I don't think this is always easy to do. It sounds easy. When I first started in behavioral health, it was kind of, we had success. We were able to have cake every month and celebrate. You know, budgets change, flexibility change. How do we get that messaging of success out to other folks? So we're always looking for success stories at the HCA. So feel free to use our contact information to share some of this stuff, because that's what we can do when we advocate with the legislatures. Like, we can show data, but then we can show that meaningful story of how lives have been changed.
I want to add also the collaboration piece and communicating with team members is equally important in housing as well. The more you can immerse yourself in the housing community and with other members of a person's care team, the more people you're going to have that have eyes on the situation, the more resources there's going to be to help that person secure housing, secure food, energy assistance, transportation, all of those pieces that it takes to help somebody become stably housed and make sure that they maintain that housing.
This is not an easy job.
No,
There's
it's not.
barriers and obstacles. And I'm sure we've all had experiences where it hasn't been a successful outcome. So I do appreciate all the passion that everybody has to do this. And Nessa's right. There's a lot of different things that go into this. And this is just a few of the things out there. But I believe educating and being at presentations like this, we can really change the thought process in terms of reducing stigma out in the community and providing support for people to be successful in our communities. This is a Nessa slide. I think I keep it in all my PowerPoints now because I like it. Any thoughts or questions? Yes. Oh, let me come over so it can get recorded.
Rena Shaver, Okanagan County Community Action. We have just onboarded FCS for housing. We're on the wait list. We have 50 people. All but one of our claims have been approved. So we're just waiting. But my question is, we want to move into employment early in the year, and I think we've talked about this before.
Yes.
And I can't remember the answer, so I'm going to ask the question again. One of our biggest challenges is being able to find staff funding to be able to segregate housing and employment positions for the FCS program. And I'm wondering if there has been any funding made available for that so that we can have a dedicated case manager for employment as we move into that.
I just want to say, ideally, we do love to see that those are separate roles, as housing will often, as you know, take precedent because there's those crises and urgent situations. And I also want to say, if you have to start off with somebody playing a dual role, that's absolutely okay. We've seen agencies do it and do it well. And ideally, over time, you can build up enough momentum and stability to add it as a separate role. And I am not aware of any specific funding. Yep, okay, just wanted to check with Kimberly. I apologize for that answer. Please keep asking, please keep bugging us about it.
This is a community advocate because you're always asking and looking for those resources.
And
So thank you for that.
You can't bug us too much. We are absolutely here for that. Please ask us all the questions, poke us all the times, continue asking. We love to see that. You're doing a fantastic job advocating.
Yeah, the rates for FCS providers on the employment side, it's per 15-minute unit. So with our third-party administrator, WellPoint, they focus on that billing and reimbursement aspect. But it is a fee-for-service, and I've been in services a long time. I think when I first started, you know, a long time ago, everybody was fee-for-service, and then the model changed, and we saw less money in the systems, particularly for employment needs. And so it's really nice to have this model to provide employment services. So with an authorization for employment, it's a 6-month cycle, and you get 30 units. Oh, I can't remember. I'm having a fade about what the price per unit is, Melody. I'm sorry?
I think it's 20, is it 27?
27, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I talk about this a lot. My apologies. And feedback we get from providers that it's not enough. And, you know, you're right, because the cost of everything is going up. The cost of workforce development is going up. Cost of retention, it is. But without this, a lot of programs wouldn't be able to create the employment services we have. So I'll hand it over to Nessa a little bit for on the units from the housing side.
Yeah, supportive housing and supported employment are billed differently. Like Darren said, supported employment is billed on 15-minute increments, and housing is billed on a per diem rate. So whether you spend 15 minutes with somebody in a day or 4 hours with somebody in a day, you're still going to get the $112 reimbursement rate. And that's also 30 units within a 6-month period. But of course, if you have somebody who's a really high utilizer and needs more than 30 units of service in 6 months, you can always ask for additional units. And usually those will get approved if you do the process properly.
And we've had some people, I think, that are still within the FCS system when this was launched 6 years ago.
Yes, yeah, people can continue to be renewed as long as they continue to need the supports and the services. There's absolutely people that have been enrolled for the last 6 years, yeah.
On the employment side, you do have to walk a narrow pathway because if you're working with DVR, Division of Voc Rehab, you have to be sensitive and not overlapping services. So that's a cautionary tale of that crosswalk. But without these services, nobody else pays for individualized services for housing or employment that I'm aware of. So $27 per unit. Thank you, Melody. it takes an audience to share information. So thank you for that.
You'd think we would have those numbers off the top of our head by now.
You would think so.
Yes,
We need more
Kimberly.
training with Kimberly.
We have just recently gone through a rate study for FCS programs, so there is potential for those rates to increase for those services in the future. We just had to look at some of the different factors around providing the services, the staffing, and those kinds of things. So it could increase in the future. We're hoping to be able to do that.
Yay, that's really good news. Thank you, Kimberly. We're also waiting for a report from Oregon State University that had some promising best practices, and a few of them are lower rates of incarceration when somebody's, within our FCS program, particularly employment, decrease hospitalizations, acute hospitalizations, and decrease in emergency department visits. So there's some statistical, that didn't come out right, statistical data out there that really shows the impact that FCS providers are making in the community, providing the services throughout Washington State. Any other thoughts or questions?
This is our contact information up here, as well as our colleague Dawn. I'm sure we've said this several times by now, but please feel free to utilize us as much as possible for any questions related to supportive housing or supported employment. That's what we're here for. That's our whole job, is answering those questions and helping out the provider network. We do lots of individualized trainings. All of our supports and services are totally free. Pretty much anything related to either of those topics we can give a training on.
And we're happy to come out and just talk about evidence-based practices or talk about challenges. I know I've gone out to different organizations and go through the IPS fidelity scale just to kind of see where people are at. So it's a great way to get to know the resources out there, engage with us as trainers. I don't know of any other program that provides as much free training as we do.
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot of there's not as much awareness as we would like about
Yes.
what all we can help with and that we are available and exist. And I think a lot of people are under the misconception that we're really hard to reach, or it's going to take a long time to get us to come out. We're available in person. We're available online. If you can get a hold of us, and we can coordinate schedules and set things up.
Plus, we have a
We're very
monthly
accessible.
newsletter that comes
Yep.
out, the FCS newsletter, so
And
we can
we have-
reach out and sign up for that. So it talks about all our trainings and updates to the program as well.
Yep, I believe between the two programs, we have something like 15 webinars a month about supportive housing and supported employment between us and our national TA providers.
Any other questions? Well, you've been a great audience today. Thank you for the time, and thank you for the engagement and the questions. Really appreciate that.